we're seeing more buying than ever. A lot of people are moving and looking at the bigger picture. As a reserve, you want something that you know is going to store value, not an asset like our dollar that's lost reserve currency status. This is not a day trading stock. This is not a call or put or options or even crypto. This is an asset to put away.
We're speaking after market close on Monday, March 23rd. Gold has reached the lowest level of 2026, briefly touching below $4,300 an ounce. Is this an everything sell-off, or is this the beginning of gold's end? We're joined today by Morgan Steckler, Senior Director of Priority Gold. Morgan, welcome to the show. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you for having me.
What do you think is causing gold sell-off? Let's start here.
I mean, there's a lot of external factors that are happening, especially recently. You have seen one of the largest pullbacks probably in decades for gold and silver. A lot of this is tied to the uncertainty when you look at, the geopolitical landscape. But first, when you really look at a stronger US dollar, that's pressurizing gold. That's one factor. You see treasury yields that have jumped after the Fed announcements of not raising rates. On top of that, you've seen big funds taking profits after an historic run. You've seen gold and silver move massively over the last year. When a market climbs hard, institutions try to lock in profits during volatility. And finally, you probably see margin calls that are also creating forced selling. All of these factors, especially with oil spikes and stocks falling, the volatility, hedge funds are sometimes, selling gold to simply make sure they have the liquidity for their other moves. I'd say it's probably a mechanical selling. It's not a change in a lot of the long-term convictions behind what the metals represent.
Where does the floor look like to you at this point, Morgan?
I don't have a crystal ball. I get that question asked quite a bit. I always refer and lean to, other institutions. A lot of people could say that you could see gold in the high 3,000s. Again, I don't know. I do see, companies like JP Morgan who still predict 6,000+ gold, in 2026. For me personally, I look at it when there's a dip like this, especially one that you've never really seen before, to buy an opportunity, into moving into an asset that really counters everything else that's happening, at least in my humble opinion.
We're going to get into the macro in just a bit and talk about Priority Gold in more detail. But given that Priority Gold has real-time information on what customers want, tell us about what your clients are interested in right now. Is there more selling pressure? Is there a lot more buying interest, even at $4,300 an ounce, which is significantly lower than just a couple weeks ago? What are clients telling you, Morgan?
When I'm talking to clients every day, and when everyone here are talking to our clients, we're seeing more buying than ever. A lot of people are moving and looking at the bigger picture. They're seeing writing on the wall when they see things like the dollar devaluation, hyperinflation, a lot of these uncertainties that's led us from, the last big correction in the markets in 2008. Our debt was at 12 trillion. We're at almost 40 trillion currently, almost over three times the amount. We're in an unsustainable model. So people are buying for preservation. People are buying as a defense, a long-term legacy. So I see mainly buying personally. That's what we're seeing here.
Buying in terms of what kind of products?
Physical gold and silver. People are moving, part of their trusts or retirement accounts, parts of their portfolios that they don't need today or tomorrow. They're just trying to park their assets in what is a better survival tactic and what's going to be there, after this, quote, storm passes by.
So these clients of yours, are they primarily, I guess, long-term holders and long-term investors, or are they trading more on a short-term basis?
I would say majority of these are for people who are older, have retirement accounts, who are looking for legacy and defense and preservation. People who have probably lived longer on this planet than you and I, and are looking to make sure that their affairs are in order, making sure that they have, what they worked hard for in their coffer. So when they need to get it, or if someone they love takes over that account, that coffer is still there. We do have clients who do trade, but mainly in this case, a lot of people are putting this in for longer term holds.
Let me play for you a clip of Ray Dalio speaking at the Greenwich Economic Forum about a couple months ago, back in October. Now, this was before the massive run up in gold. Take a listen to what he's saying here.
When you're thinking, you're doing your asset allocation, what is going to protect your real after-tax returns so you create that optimal mix? Gold is a very excellent diversifier of the portfolio. So if you were to look at, just from the strategic asset allocation mix perspective, you would probably have something like, as the optimal mix, something like 15% of your portfolio in gold, because of the fact that if you didn't even have a tactical, because it is the one asset that does very well when the typical parts of your portfolio go down, because the typical parts of your portfolio are also so credit dependent. So anyway, I think all of this means that there should be some piece in that of gold. If I'm making tactical bets, I don't like debt assets per se. And I would say I don't like debt assets per se, not just government debt assets, but also if you're looking, let's say, at credit or private credit and look at where the credit spreads are. Credit spreads are very, very low. And so for those various reasons, my tilts would be away from those things.
15% of your portfolio should be gold. The typical institutional investor has a lot less than 15%, maybe 5 to 10%, and not all institutional funds hold gold. Why is it that gold, even despite today's massive run-up, or not today, but this season, I guess this quarter's massive run-up, is still maybe underinvested by the big funds?
I would say, and I love Ray Dalio. I mean, he is one of the godfathers of when you look at the macroeconomic cycles. You know, he has said when you look at the 400-year cycle, we went from a Dutch to a British to a U.S.-led world monetary system. You know, from what I read, you know, his fund is actually moved from, I think, 15%. He's almost doubled that. Gold is a haven. You know, when you have political, you know, issues, when you have environmental issues, when you have, you know, civil unrest, when you have all of these, quote, black swan events all coming together and converging, going into an alternative asset, something that you have more power over, or if you're a fund or even a central bank or another country as a reserve, you want something that you know is going to store value, not an asset like our dollar that's lost reserve currency status, not paper. And when he talks about things like the credit defaults, yeah, when you see a repeat of what's happened from 2007 and 2008, that's starting to happen. This is the time where you want to keep assets more close to the vest, if that answers your question.
If we take a look at this chart, though, let me just pull up a gold price chart. This is gold, and if we zoom in to just the last month, it seems like there isn't a perfect correlation, negative correlation with the dollar. Now, obviously, they don't always move against each other perfectly all the time. There are periods when they move together. Now would be one of them. Earlier in March, you saw as the dollar rose, right after the Iran war started. The conflict started on the 28th of February, the last day of February, and investors rushed to the dollar as a safe haven, and it's been basically rising ever since. Gold started falling on that. But ever since the beginning of the second week of March, which was the 13th, we saw the dollar stabilize and start trending down. Gold still didn't reverse and is still falling. So it seems like everything is selling off. Do you think investors are rotating to oil? Is that why everything's just selling off?
Well, I think that there's a lot of immediate, actions that are being taken place. You know, when you look at what's happening with the Middle East, energy shock, you see obviously crude oil is elevated. You see inflation forecasts are raising, but when you also take into account Fed delaying cut rates and central banks buying aggressively, things like metals, maybe people or funds are shifting into oil. That obviously is all over the news and very current, but when you're looking at a different kind of step back, you look at the continued uncertainty. This, supports or bolsters the idea of having assets that are immune or a more of a conservative play against, all of this chaos that's hitting us from every which way.
If we zoom back at the overall large long-term price of gold, the history of gold going all the way back to the 70s, when it first started becoming free-floating as an asset. You've worked in this industry for many decades now, in alternative assets in particular. How does this cycle feel different than prior gold bull cycles, specifically 2020 and 2011?
I mean, in 20, well, obviously that chart starts around where Bretton Woods, where we left the gold standard. It's
Yeah.
interesting that since then, I mean, we lost what, 99% of the value of our dollar. Gold, you had the Hunt brothers for the gold and silver in the 80s. When we were kind of in a boring phase of 2011 to 2015, I mean, our world was very different. In this cycle, I'd probably take it at the beginning of the pandemic, the last 4 years. The world shut down. Countries and ours, when we look at it, we created almost what, 80% of our dollar supply the last 4 years or so compared to a 250 plus year history. That, and you allude to a Ray Dalio, that's hyperinflation. No currency in the history of man has ever survived a hyperinflated currency. That currency has failed. So when you have the trillions that were printed out of nowhere, probably most of it going into publicly traded stocks to boost the price, to hide the loss, to make, our country and people feel everything's okay. We're not. Things are costing more for less.
Yeah.
Our debt's out of control. We're adding trillion or so, every 1 or 2 months. It's just unsustainable. And so moving and having a correlation with gold and silver, people in the last year, gold and silver shot up because, when our currency was downgraded as a reserve currency asset, when other countries don't want to touch our asset and are buying up gold and silver, selling off their positions of dollar, that just further deflates our supply of currency in and of itself. It's going into where can we survive? And gold and silver are an asset that an ounce will always remain an ounce. That's also, one of the underlying factors is also we're at multi-year lows of availability. Whether the prices are moving up and down, the physical supply is becoming increasingly harder to get. People, countries, funds are buying it up. And people can get caught up in the short term, but look at the big picture of what's happening.
I have here a big picture chart of gold versus the S&P 500, and obviously performances between these two assets vary depending on your time frame. But just starting from 1971, the early 70s, when Nixon took the U.S. dollar off the gold standard, gold is up 12,000%, while the S&P 500 is up 7,000%. What's your first reaction to seeing these numbers?
I think that, when you look at those charts too, I mean, you saw a big run up in 2008 to 2012. That was when we had the last major crash. That was where the people, you saw 20, 30, 40% drop after, those defaults that occurred. That was back then. This is just a whole different ballgame. And you're seeing that parabolic up curve because we're in a different world, more population, very tech dependent, but we're at 3 times the amount of debt as a country. We don't really have any legs to stand on. And the perception of our currency is very different than it was back then. So, I don't think we've never really seen anything like this, and in times like this, it's just more concerning. And, for me, I like to personally look at it as a time to be selfish. I want to keep what's mine. I want it for my family and my kids. I want to preserve it. And I'm just not one to want to have to pay the price for the mistakes that, led us to where we are as a whole.
Here's my explanation, and please offer a different viewpoint if you disagree. Gold has stopped becoming a safe haven asset in the last 6 months, and it started becoming a speculative asset. People rushed to gold in the last 2 quarters the same way they maybe rushed to Bitcoin in 2021 because they saw capital appreciation potential. And they're selling off for the exact same reason because they're rotating to something else, whether it be stocks or into oil or other commodities, or just selling off because gold has become a fear trade when everything else sold off. Does that make any sense to you?
It could make sense. I would almost say gold, when I look at the alternative assets, gold has always been kind of the store of value. It's been a real form of money because it's fungible, transferable, transportable, a store of value in and of itself. It defines, what real money is. I would almost say silver is one that, people, whether you say crypto or other assets, people really saw an upswing there because, of the industrial needs and the low supplies, because of it being conductive, conducive, and reflective. Those NVIDIAs and Teslas, you need it for your solar panel arrays and microchips, et cetera. That is when you start seeing commercials and everyone talking about it, that is where, the hype does, blow up. But, I do always, again, caution and take a step back. I don't look at this through one winter or one big up and down. I look at this at the big picture. And, if I'm sitting on funds, I'd rather have it in what I know is going to survive, not in a matter of days. I look at this as if I'm holding something 3 to 5 years longer term through what's happening, because the world's shifting exponentially quicker than, what it once was, 5, 10 years ago.
The average age of Priority Gold's clients, I mean, you probably don't have the exact number. I don't know the statistic, but just based on your personal observation, would you say above 35, above 40, younger than 35? What's the range, do you think?
I would say it's well over the 35, 40. I would say I'd have to look at the data, but I would not be surprised. These are people who have had careers, men and women who, are older, maybe, earshot away from retirement or at retirement, starting to look at, different stages of their life. This is, not a younger demographic, like, as you mentioned, people into Bitcoin or other assets. This is more of a different stage where you do want preservation, where you've seen the world shifting. So it is a different perception than what you and I might have.
Your answer basically corroborates with my own personal experience as well, having interviewed a lot of people in this space and met a lot of people investing in this space, having met them myself as well. The question I have for you is whether or not gold is really just a retiree's asset, or do you think it's because the previous generations have become more exposed to precious metals and traditional hard assets than the younger generation? And if that's the case, I wonder if the younger people growing up in 40 years, 30 years time will still flock to gold when they retire.
I mean, the world has shifted. I mean, this world, in 5 and 10 years ago and 20 years ago, our when we were investing, it was a very different time. I do also think that, we're coming up into the big transfer of wealth that we'll ever see when, I think the baby boomer generation is passing along their wealth. Where are these people moving their funds, whether it's inherited or not? There's also more money out there because it's more printed than ever. As our population increases, as we're so dependent on technology, going into what is a finite asset, you can only get a certain amount out of the ground. Even with modern technology, there's only so much out there. And we're, again, multi-year lows of physical gold and silver. And that's needed. Silver for technology, gold as a store of value. But people, countries, they're buying up that asset. So it's kind of looking at what they're doing. It's making it less for the every man and woman out there. Now, that concerns me. That's why I've been buying up the assets personally.
Do you think that there's going to be a strong, jurisdiction in the world for gold demand going forward? In other words, if most of the demand for gold from an investor's perspective is going to come from Asia or Europe or North America going forward?
I mean, when you look at the largest holders, the BRICS nations have always been the largest buyers of gold and silver. They've been doing that for the last number of years. So they've started to part ways with the dollar as a reserve asset. So when you look at Russia, China, Brazil, South Africa, India, when you're looking at those countries, they have most of the world's population. They have most of the world's hard assets. They're buying it up metric tons at a time. So yeah, we don't know what is coming next. But, I don't feel comfortable with our currency. We are at the end of our cycle. Things are shifting. And when we're shifting, where can we park? I'm not a real estate expert. Whether we have properties or not, that's a whole different world. But you could at least touch, feel, and hold it. Metals are a haven and have been and always has. How at the end of the day, how do you or how do the viewers, feel? Do you feel comfortable? Do you want your money in your control or not? That if you want it in your control, at least having it in a physical form, that's what builds your wall or barrier or vault around your money. That's what truly protects that portion. Because if the other shoe drops, this is your fallback option. That's what saved many people in 2008, 2001, etc. We just don't know when this is all going to happen. This is a preventative measure, being early than late to a slaughter of sorts.
Speaking of Ray Dalio, he's also been calling for a debt crisis reckoning in the U.S., actually globally. He's calling this the late stages of a major debt cycle facing a debt death spiral. He's projecting a critical 3-year window for fixing unsustainable debt to GDP, after which a severe all-at-once crisis may happen. Is there ever going to be a point where the U.S. debt actually manifest into a financial crisis?
I would almost ask that question back to you. I personally think you look at what's happening. We're seeing a repeat of 2008, and in 2007, you saw, the Lehman Brothers, the Bear Stearns, the private debt credit issues. You're seeing the BlackRocks out there. They're starting to limit how much money you can start taking out of your accounts. They're starting to put walls up. The default rate, I believe, in 2008 was around 8.2% or something. I think right now we're at 9.5%. It was a 12 trillion deficit in 2008. We're at 39 trillion or so. We're 3 times worse. That's very scary. A lot of people just are so being bombarded with so many things, chaotically speaking, in life these days that, it's hard to take a step back and see this other than you see the prices of, your cost of goods and your groceries. Things are costing more for less. Look what happened to oil, just from what's occurred over the last number of weeks. It goes back to where do we feel comfortable putting what we worked hard for? That's how I personally look at it. And these are the conversations I have with clients one-on-one every day.
What are some misconceptions you've gotten about the purpose for holding gold? In other words, some people have different reasons for why they may want to hold gold, or just they don't hold gold and they think gold is for a specific purpose that, in your opinion, is just wrong. What are some of these misconceptions?
I think it's a good question. I think a lot of people look at gold. Some of them, hey, I want to flip this or trade it. For me, I look at these as long-term holdings. This is not a day trading stock. This is not a call or put or options or even crypto. This is an asset to put away. You're doing this for a different perspective. Usually a client, will hold this 3 to 5 years. You're not looking at this today or tomorrow. Misconception is, gold's moving up. Will it always move up? We don't know. But we do know if the fundamentals, yes, you pull back or zoom in, you're going to see drastic ups and downs. Probably not as drastic as what we've recently seen. We've never really seen that. But when you look at the big picture of comparing it to what gold is priced at for us in dollar, how long is the dollar going to be here? An ounce will stay as an ounce, whatever we're going to be reevaluating if and when that were to happen. An ounce, these ounces are preservation, strategies. It's not financial advice, but to the extent that that resonates, this is where you have your time. This is your time that you can make a move to protect. That's why we're as busy as we are.
I don't think I've ever asked the following question to somebody before, and I've done this a lot, but I just came up with this idea here. The idea of knowing when you're in a financial position to own gold. Let's just back up and think about what I mean by this. Everybody goes through a financial life cycle. You go to high school. Some people go to trade school. Some people go to college. You start working. You accumulate wealth. Start a family, maybe buy a house, maybe, and then you go through life, and then eventually you retire. And then before you pass on, you pass your wealth to your kids. At what point in your life does one start thinking about gold? Now, if I were working 5 to 7 and I'm living paycheck to paycheck, investing against hyperinflation and all these crises we're talking about is probably the last thing on my mind, right?
Yeah.
At what point does a person look at himself and say, hey, I think it's time that I start investing in gold? What does that aha moment click in?
I think that comes down to the individual. I think with age, does come, a maturity and experience. You look at some of the people in cryptocurrency, for instance, who made massive amounts. But if you're in your early 20s, you don't think, you're going to be in a different stage if you are with a significant other or have kids and properties. The future, you don't think about that. I think as you've maybe lost a job or, had career changes, you start, accumulating maybe debt from having a mortgage, having childcare or school. Once you start having real life and you take a moment to start looking at your bills, most people in our country can't afford, their rent the following month. You're seeing the highest credit card debt ever. I think that comes, maybe it doesn't start until your 30s or 40s or even 50s. Some people might not ever get there. But for those who have had successes, the financially savvy or the people who have done well, they've clearly done well for a reason. Maybe they did get lucky, maybe not. But if you've built up that wealth, a lot of our goals is, at the very least, I want to keep that wealth. I want to grow it, but I want to keep that wealth. I don't want to see it be, sliced in, 20% or 30 or 40% due to, what's happening. And whenever that happens, that could be swift and severe. So I like that question. I think that just comes with time, and, that's hard. It's hard to answer. Does that make sense? I think it comes down to, the life experiences of
You don't think
what
there's
occurs.
any one specific life experience, or I guess a financial position in which one starts to look at gold? There's people start speculating at a young age. When I was in my 20s, I played around with options. I didn't think about playing around with gold futures, for example. Right? I
Yeah.
traded other things. But you're right. As you grow older, you mature a little bit, and your assets balloon, and you have more to allocate into different things. You start thinking about an all-weather portfolio, like Ray Dalio talks about. Maybe that's where gold fits in. At what point did you start looking into gold? You're a serial entrepreneur, but before you started your own businesses, you worked at several gold companies. Why did you choose this industry?
And it's funny. I actually have a numismatic background, with my name being Morgan. My father actually gave me a Morgan dollar, which was a U.S. silver coin created between 1878 and 1921. He gave me one when I was 6 years old and joked, "This was made and named after you." I started getting into the coins. I've always been into collectibles, whether it was sports cards or cryptocurrency or metals. I just started collecting at a young age. I was always passionate about it, and I was lucky to stay in this career of alternative assets. But I have 40 plus years of being in the metals. I've always collected, and being in this space, especially as wealth has come, it just became very easy for me to find this as a career to help others. As I've had successes, people always ask where and how, do you maintain or grow your assets? I'm not a trader. I'm more of a hoarder. I want to collect and keep it because I don't need it. I'd rather have it for my family. So I always was looking for preservation tactics. I always have been good at making sure we've had retirement accounts for my wife and myself, making sure that if I were not here, my family's going to be okay. So, I try and instill those kinds of ideas and methodologies into at least, the back of someone's mind so they can make those similar preparations, especially as maybe you have a life-changing experience or death or some injury, something that changes the way you look at life. That might be your aha moment where I better have my affairs in order. How am I going to make sure that, what's mine is going to be for my bloodline and my family and preservation?
Has anyone ever said to you, gold belongs to a bygone era? We're looking at digital assets now. We're looking at tokenized assets. We're looking at the blockchain. Why invest in an asset that was needed 5,000 years ago? Not very many people in our society in the West use it as real money anymore. We don't go to McDonald's and transact with gold. It's a gone industry. Why not invest in the future? Have you ever gotten that conversation?
Oh yeah, all the time. I look at in cryptocurrency. I have had experience in that space for quite some time. I've always liked alternative assets. The traditional assets, or when I was much younger and I had a broker who talked me out of, for instance, buying Apple before the iPhone came out. I don't like other people looking at our money as their money. I've always liked alternative assets because they're more in your control. When you look at alternative assets, there is the aggressive approach of cryptocurrencies because yes, you can store them offline on a ledger and you can have control of it. There's upside there. It's very nascent when you look at it from a long-term perspective. But when you look at the other side of the coin, no pun intended, the conservative approach of what has always been, what was once tied to our dollar, what was used from the Roman era and before, gold and silver. It meets the real definitions of what money is. And, especially as things have, just moved in a hyper, fast time frame. 1 year really technologically is how many years at this point? This is a conservative way just to ensure that you have some of those chips off the table so the house doesn't win if some shift were to occur, which it just seems like it's starting to pile up.
So how does Priority Gold prepare its product offerings for this shift? What does the future of gold demand look like, and how are your product offerings compatible with this future?
So a priority gold, and you can always call, and I'm sure you'll provide that information. We like to help send information. We're an education-based company. You can talk one-on-one with myself or any of our specialists. Our goal is to learn, help you figure out what you want. It's your money, not ours. So if you see the same kind of writings on the wall, if you're seeing the world shifting and you're uncertain where to go, this is worth a conversation. So, we can help you look at, your pie in and of itself. And when we start digging in to that extent, what portion of your pie makes sense for you just to park in something that will be sustainable and be there. This is it. It's not flashy. It's conservative. It's defense. It's legacy. It's preservation. And in this world today, those give you more of a peace of mind, than when you look at your statement every month and see your portfolio having the swings that they currently have. People can only take so much of that. So this provides that stability and making sure, you know what you have will remain.
So tell us about the origins of the company and what you're trying to achieve right now.
I mean, we've been around for 20 plus years. Our goal, we are on a foundation of education, transparency, and compliance. We're probably the top company in the space for a long time. Our goal is to help people. I wish we can help more people, but we only have so much staff and so many hours in the day. But, our goal is to help people. We buy a lot every week. We sell a lot every week. We're here to help you buy the right product for the right reasons, the right price, and help you protect. That's essentially what we're here for, whether it's with trusts or retirement accounts. If you are seeing the writing on the wall, you have too much cash, you have too much exposure in a certain market. It's not financial advice, but this can be a solution for you to take a portion to ensure, the survival of what you have. Consider a life raft on a Titanic of sorts. May you not ever need it, but it's better to have it and not need than need it and not have it scenario.
Okay. And what are the most popular products on your platform right now?
I mean, a lot of people are buying products like gold and silver eagles, coins that are easily sellable, whether they're from us or from another company. If one's buying this on hand, you have product that you can go anywhere, the recognition of them, usually something like a coin, that anywhere around the world would know what they are. There's a market for them. If that quote zombie apocalypse occurs, that you have something for barter and exchange. People want to have this, emergency fund and know that you have authentic product, reliable product, not some weird esoteric, product that no one knows about. You want something that's reliable, safe, and assured. And that's part of what we do here.
It's not just gold though, right? It's also silver. Tell us about your
Gold,
complete product line. Yeah.
Yeah, gold, silver. We do have some clients who like platinum, palladium, but I would say the majority of our clients work in some combination of gold and silver. When you work with our specialists, we can help you. As we get to know you on a one-on-one fashion, we'll help you determine what makes sense. Because again, this is all catered for you. That's part of the relationship we provide for the life of as long as you are with us. People join our family and they stay with us for a reason.
Okay, and you also offer gold in IRAs. Tell us about retirement planning overall before we even talk about why we should be putting gold in your IRA or 401k. At what point in somebody's life should we start thinking about and planning for retirement?
I mean, I think is when you have that light bulb moment, you should. I think as you have an IRA or 401k, if you change jobs, it's no longer a contributing, 401k. It moves into a traditional IRA. There are people who just keep on forgetting that they have, X amount in older plans as they shifted jobs. When you start kind of, taking a step and looking at what you have, as you get older, you start having more successes. When you start looking at that, you have two choices. Where can I maybe grow, but where can I also preserve? I think that answer shifts a little bit more into preservation as you get older, because you want to make sure you have enough to last your days. And for those who have had extreme successes, maybe you want to make sure that, you want to ensure it's there for the people you love, whether it's your kids or grandkids, charities, whatever it might be. But, you want to ensure that, it stays, in where you want it to be.
So what's wrong with my traditional 60/40 401k portfolio? Why do I need gold to be added to my retirement?
Well, how do you feel about what's happening? Do we feel comfortable with what's occurring, with this volatility, with, without politics, but look at war, look at our population increase, look at geopolitical concerns, look at the perspective of our currency compared to the rest of the world. Things are shifting very quickly. I don't want to have all my assets tied into things that are just one and zeros. A digital tsunami has hit us. Everything is tied to a push of a button. And again, that goes back to having something that is outside of that, where you have something that can't be moved with that push of a button. It's more of that peace of mind, especially in a world that, as we grow and grow, who knows how long until we end up in some George Orwellian dystopian 1984, type world, a la a digital dollar, that who knows, but we won't know until it happens. I'd rather be prepared and early than, a day late.
How do the mechanisms of adding gold to my 401k work? Does Priority Gold assist with that process?
That's a good question. We handle all of that for you. So when you're talking to myself or one of our specialists, we will actually help you with the establishment of a new IRA. We help you roll over lateral moves, tax free. It's just a transfer into a specific alternative asset IRA company, where then we can help you move that dollar position into physical ounces of metals. Those metals will then be stored by your IRA in their depository, essentially in your locker with your name and account number on it. So it's vaulted, stored, insured in your account. You have online access. You can always sell it. If you have an RMD later in life, you could take it essentially even in physical form every year as well. So you could stay out of the dollar. But it's a very easy process. It takes call with our IRA department, maybe 3 to 5 days. We'll help you convert it whenever you want to sell or make another move. That's where we're always here to help.
What have been some of the most, I guess, surprising developments in the bullion space in the last 6 months, when prices were soaring to unprecedented historical levels? Some things that surprised you in regards to sales, customer inquiries, sentiment, premiums, even supply chain bottlenecks, perhaps anything that came up.
Mm-hmm. Bottlenecks, the entire space, depositories, industries, wholesalers, refineries, depositories, everyone is backed up. Only a certain amount of personnel are allowed in vaults. They're backed up with inquiries on ins and outs. You're seeing supply shocks because, sometimes wait times can be increased. You're also seeing, earlier this year, and the first time I can remember, even the U.S. Mint suspended all sales of gold and silver. At one point, they shut down their silver sales, and then they opened up silver, and they were selling, I believe, something like Proof Silver Eagles at in $170 plus for an ounce of silver. And I think that was when silver was approaching, in the 100 and something. But it's looking at where, some of the big depositories or mints are now starting to adjust because they ran out of metals. When, mints run out of metals, when depositories are low on supply, when, mining companies are not meeting their quotas, the supply shock, it becomes crazy. And either way, whether, you have ups or downs, the premiums and the shifts, it's always changing. Again, that goes back to, if you're going to buy sooner rather than later, because more and more people are looking for, protection. That does affect supply. That does affect premiums because a lot of people going after a little, that's just economics. It is what it is. And it shifts, it could shift dramatically, but if one wants to make a move, whether you dollar cost average or not, make your preparations. Waiting in many ways, this is not fear. It's just waiting. Sometimes, that's your decision and we don't know what that's going to lead to.
Well, there's a lot of bullion dealers out there in the country. How do you ensure Priority Gold's premiums stay competitive, even in today's environment, let's say?
We do our best, and every transaction, we can't do anything without a client, going through triplicate. We always have to have a consultation with a client. Every transaction, every product that they choose, we lay out what our cost is and what we sell it for. After that, there is a verbal confirmation and then a DocuSign after. So they have complete control of the process. People are welcome to do their due diligence, but part of what we do as, transparency and education and compliance, we're here to guide you. If you're buying this for this reason, here's the cost. Here's our cost. Here's what we sell it for. Everything is laid out transparently. That's why people try, and come to us. They trust us because, we have everything on the table. We're here to help you. We get to change and save people's lives. I mean, it's very gratifying for what we do.
Speaking of trust, the biggest concern I think a lot of investors have with any, asset allocator or bank or asset management company or bullion company like yourself or any sort of custodian is whether my asset's still going to be there if I want to redeem it. So let's say I have chosen to go through Priority Gold to manage my gold holdings in my RIA or my 401 account. Do I have the option to redeem the gold when I want to? And how do I ensure that it's still going to be there when I need it?
So, good question. So if it's in an IRA, we're just the ones who are your metals relationship. Your IRA and your funds are held within the IRA. There's IRA regulations. These are held by the IRA depositories. Every account comes with a minimum $4 million Lloyd's of London insurance policy. All of these assets are stored, audited, insured. Your assets are your assets. If you're dealing with a private vault, say you have a trust, and we can help you set up your own private vault. It could be in your name. It could be in the name of a trust with beneficiaries. It's your vault. You can literally, there are vaults around the country. You can call them up and say, send me my metals. They'll be delivered to you. You could drive there and say, put it into my vehicle and drive off. It's your metals. We don't hold metals for anyone. So that's why, if we're not here, your IRA will hold those metals. Your vault will hold your metals. If you make a purchase, we can ship it right to you. You hold the metals. We don't hold metals for clients. So, what you have is yours.
Well, let's close off on the future of gold. Every time there's been a revaluation of the asset in a bull cycle, it's gone up about, I would say, at least 2 to 3x from the previous cycle peak. Now, nobody has a crystal ball. We're not asking you to tell us what the price is going to be next month. But based on the information that you've gathered for yourself, as well as the analysis that you've heard from other people, what does the next cycle high look like for you?
I mean, again, you said that properly. I mean, if I don't have a crystal ball, if I did, I would be on my island away from all of this chaos.
Invite us, please.
You are welcome. You can. I'll have many interview with you there. But you look at analysts, look at the experts. J.P. Morgan, for instance, it maintains a 2026 target still of 6,300. You look at BMO or Bank of America. They predict 150 to even 300 for silver this year. We don't know where this is going to go. I do know the amount of ounces are going down. I do know 2 years ago and 1 year ago, it was a very different industry and space. We're seeing, bottlenecks occur. We're seeing the world shift. So if I have concerns and I don't see that shifting anytime soon, none of us do, except in more of a negative way. This is why, I'd rather be sooner than later into at least testing the waters. Whether you do 5 or 10% or 20% or 30, whatever it is, it's your funds, not ours. But having something of that pie in physical, it probably is more important than ever. I would say that.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Morgan. Tell us where we can find you, follow your work, and follow your company.
You can always find us. Come to prioritygold.com. You can request a free guide and schedule a call with a consultation. I'm sure you're going to also, let them know. But prioritygold.com, you can request information and you can call our toll-free number. I'm sure you'll also send them a message, for whatever is needed. But we're here to help 24/7 essentially. So we work almost around the clock these days.
I have a special link down in the description below. If you go to prioritygold.com/David, you'll get a free precious metals playbook, or if you text David, DAVID, to 24999, you'll also grab the guide. So thank you, Morgan. We'll put the links down below. Follow Priority Gold
Perfect.
there and get more information. Appreciate your time. We'll speak again soon. Take care for now.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe.